The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of our kitchen as I stared at the phone screen. The sound echoed through our empty house like a gunshot, but it was nothing compared to the explosion happening inside my chest. Can't wait to sail away with you tomorrow, my love. Room 247. Our little secret paradise. The text wasn't meant for me. It was meant for her. For Glenda. My husband of 12 years had sent it to the wrong contact by mistake. After all these months of carefully orchestrated lies, all these perfectly crafted excuses about business trips and late nights at the office, he had finally slipped up. One tiny mistake that tore apart everything I thought I knew about my life. I sank to my knees among the glittering shards of glass, my silk dress soaking up the spilled champagne. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been celebrating. Just 30 minutes ago, I had been dancing around this very kitchen, champagne in hand, toasting my husband's business success that was supposedly taking him on a luxury cruise to the Caribbean. I had been so proud of him, so supportive, even helping him pack his suitcase with the same hands that now shook with rage. The house felt different now. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows grew deeper, and every family photo lining the hallway seemed to mock me with their frozen smiles. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of building a life together. 12 years of trust that had just been incinerated by 23 words on a phone screen. But as I knelt there among the broken glass, something else began to bloom in my chest alongside the pain. Something cold and calculating. Something that whispered promises of justice in the dark corners of my mind. Because I knew something my dear husband didn't. I knew exactly who Glenda was. And more importantly, I knew her husband. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. My name is Alicia Lennox, and until 6 hours ago I thought I was living a perfect life. I had been the ideal wife. The kind of woman who had dinner on the table at exactly 6:30 every evening, who remembered every anniversary and birthday, who supported every dream and ambition. I had given up my own career as a marketing executive to build our home, to be the foundation that allowed Clayton to climb higher and higher in his architectural firm. Our house on Willowbrook Lane was a testament to that sacrifice. Every room was perfectly decorated, every surface spotless, every detail carefully curated to reflect the successful life we had built together. The neighbors often commented on how lucky Clayton was to have found such a devoted wife. I had taken pride in those comments once. Now they felt like epithets carved on a tombstone. I picked myself up from the kitchen floor, brushing glass from my dress with mechanical precision. My reflection in the chrome refrigerator showed a woman I barely recognized. Mascara streaked down hollow cheeks, blonde hair disheveled, green eyes wild with a mixture of hurt and something darker. The phone buzzed again in my hand. Another message. This time it was meant for me. Hey honey, just boarding now. The ship is incredible. Wish you could see it. Love you. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. He was standing on that ship, probably looking right at her, and had the audacity to send me a loving message. The same fingers that had just texted his mistress about their secret paradise were now typing words of love to the wife he was betraying. I set the phone down carefully on the counter and walked to our home office. Clayton's computer sat open, still logged in. In all our years of marriage, I had never violated his privacy. I had trusted him completely. That trust died as I clicked through his browser history. Caribbean cruise bookings. Hotel reservations in Miami. Restaurant reservations for 2 under false names. And then I found the photos. Dozens of them hidden in a folder marked Project Files. Clayton and a stunning brunette woman laughing over candlelit dinners, walking hand in hand through Central Park, kissing passionately in what looked like a hotel room. Glenda Chambers. I recognized her now from the law firm's Christmas party last year. Clayton had introduced her as just a colleague, when I had noticed them talking intently by the bar. She was a partner at the firm that handled all of his company's legal work. Married. 2 children. A husband who worked as a surgeon at Mount Sinai. Dr. Alexander Chambers. My hands moved across the keyboard with newfound purpose. Within an hour, I had gathered everything I needed to know about the Chambers family. Their address on Park Avenue. Alexander's work schedule. Glenda's travel patterns. Even their children's school schedules. But most importantly, I discovered something that made my heart race with dark possibility. Dr. Alexander Chambers was scheduled to attend a medical conference in Miami this week. The same dates as Clayton's business trip. The same dates as the cruise. A plan began to form in my mind, as clear and sharp as the broken glass I had swept up from my kitchen floor. The Meridian Hospital was a fortress of white walls and antiseptic smells, but I navigated its corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged. I had dressed carefully for this encounter. A simple navy dress, minimal makeup, an expression of concerned vulnerability that would appeal to a doctor's instincts. Dr. Alexander Chambers was exactly what I had expected from his online profiles. Tall, distinguished, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up from his patient charts when I knocked on his office door, and I saw immediately why Glenda might have thought she could fool him. He had the trusting face of a man who believed in the goodness of people. "Dr. Chambers? I'm so sorry to bother you. My name is Alicia Lennox. I believe you know my husband, Clayton? He works with your wife at Wesley and Associates." The recognition flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by polite confusion. "Of course, yes. Clayton is a good man. Is everything all right?" I let my voice crack just slightly. "I was hoping you might help me understand something. You see, Clayton told me he was going on a business cruise this week, but when I called the office, they said Glenda was also out of town. I'm probably being silly, but..." The color drained from Alexander's face. "Glenda told me she was attending a conference in Chicago." "Perhaps I'm mistaken," I said quickly, watching his expression carefully. "I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation. It's just that I found some things on Clayton's computer and I'm starting to worry that maybe..." I didn't need to finish the sentence. Alexander's medical mind was already connecting the dots, his training in diagnosis working against him as he recognized the symptoms of betrayal. "What kind of things?" His voice was steady, but I could see his hands trembling slightly. I pulled out a folder I had prepared, printouts of the hotel reservations, the cruise booking, some of the more innocent photos. Nothing too explicit, just enough to plant the seed of doubt. Alexander studied the documents with the same methodical attention he probably gave to patient x-rays. I watched his face change as the evidence mounted, saw the moment when his world tilted off its axis just as mine had. "There's more," I said softly. "The cruise they're on together. It leaves from Miami tomorrow morning. The Celestial Dream, 7-day Caribbean itinerary." He looked up at me then, and I saw my own pain reflected in his eyes. "You're certain about this?" I wish I wasn't. We sat in silence for a long moment, two people who had just discovered that their marriages were built on lies. But where I had already moved past the initial shock into something darker, Alexander was still processing the betrayal. "What do we do?" he asked finally. "I have an idea," I said. "But I'll need your help." Alexander's penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, a testament to his success as one of New York's most prominent cardiac surgeons. We sat in his living room, surrounded by photos of the family life that Glenda was casually destroying with her affair. Pictures of birthday parties, family vacations, graduations, a lifetime of memories that now felt tainted. "You want us to go to Miami," Alexander said slowly, turning the cruise itinerary over in his hands. "To confront them on the ship." "Not confront," I corrected. "Surprise them. Think about it, Alexander. They think they're safe on that ship. They think they've covered their tracks perfectly. They have no idea that we know." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Imagine their faces when they see us. When they realize that their perfect little secret has been exposed in the most public way possible." Alexander set down the papers and walked to the window, staring out at the city where his wife was probably packing for her romantic getaway. "This feels like revenge." "It is revenge," I said simply. "They deserve to face the consequences of what they've done. They deserve to feel the same shock and humiliation that we're feeling right now. But the children will be better off knowing the truth about their mother. Just like I'm better off knowing the truth about Clayton." I stood and joined him at the window. "Look, Alexander, I understand if this is too much for you. I can go alone. But think about what they're planning. 7 days on a luxury cruise, laughing about how cleverly they've deceived us. 7 days of believing they've gotten away with it." His reflection in the window showed a man wrestling with his conscience. "How would we even get on the ship? The cruise sold out months ago. I smiled, and for the first time since discovering the affair, I felt something approaching satisfaction. Leave that to me. I still have some connections from my old job. And money can solve most problems, especially when you're dealing with a cruise line that wants to avoid bad publicity. Bad publicity? Think about it. A cheating wife and her lover, surprised by their spouses on a luxury cruise? That's the kind of story that goes viral. The kind of story that makes people think twice about booking their own romantic getaways. Cruise lines will pay a lot to keep that kind of scandal quiet. Alexander turned to look at me directly, and I saw something new in his expression. Not just hurt, but a flicker of the same cold fire that was burning in my chest. What exactly are you planning, Alicia? I walked back to the couch and opened my laptop, showing him the research I had done. The Celestial Dream has a formal captain's dinner on the 4th night. Black tie event, all passengers invited. Glenda and Clayton will be there, probably sitting at some romantic table, playing the perfect couple. And that's when we make our entrance. Together. As a couple ourselves. The implications hung in the air between us. Alexander's face went through a series of expressions: shock, consideration, and finally something that looked like grim determination. They'll think we're having an affair ourselves. Let them. Let them experience the confusion, the doubt, the sick feeling in their stomachs when they can't quite figure out what's happening. Let them wonder if their spouses are capable of betrayal too. I closed the laptop and looked at him seriously. Alexander, I'm not asking you to actually have an affair with me, but I am asking you to help me show them what it feels like to have their world turned upside down. To make them face the consequences of their choices in the most dramatic way possible. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the photos of his family. Finally he spoke. When do we leave? The Miami heat hit us like a wall as we stepped out of the airport, but it was nothing compared to the fire burning in my chest. Alexander and I made an oddly compelling pair. The grieving doctor and the betrayed wife, united in our mission of justice. We had booked a suite at the Fontainebleau, the same hotel where Clayton and Glenda were staying before boarding their ship. I had confirmed their reservation through a combination of social engineering and pure determination. The concierge at the front desk had been surprisingly helpful once I explained that I was planning a surprise for my husband. Are you sure about this? Alexander asked as we checked into our room. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Two married people sharing a hotel suite, just like the couple we were pursuing. It's too late for second thoughts, I replied, pulling out the elegant black dress I had packed for tomorrow night's captain's dinner. Besides, you were the one who suggested we actually go through with boarding the ship. That had been Alexander's contribution to the plan. Initially, I had thought we would simply confront them at the port, but he had made a compelling argument for taking things further. If we really want them to understand what they've put us through, he had said, we need to let them experience the full paranoia of discovery. Let them spend days wondering what we know, what we're planning. He had used his medical connections to secure us a last-minute cabin on the Celestial Dream. Apparently, there was always space available for a prominent surgeon and his wife, who needed a sudden vacation for health reasons. Our suite at the hotel was opulent, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, a marble bathroom larger than most people's bedrooms, a living area decorated in shades of cream and gold. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a war room. I spread Clayton's cruise itinerary across the coffee table, marking key locations and times. They're planning to board at 2 o'clock tomorrow. The ship doesn't leave until 6, so they'll have time to settle in, maybe explore a bit. And we board when? 4:30. Late enough that they'll already be comfortable, early enough that we can establish ourselves before dinner. I looked up at him. Remember, as far as anyone on that ship knows, we're Dr. and Mrs. Chambers, taking a romantic cruise to reconnect after a difficult period in our marriage. Alexander nodded grimly. And when we encounter them? We play it by ear. But remember, we're not confronting them directly. We're just existing in their space. Letting them draw their own conclusions about what that means. The plan was deliberately vague because I wanted to preserve the element of spontaneity. Too much planning would make it feel rehearsed, artificial. The beauty of revenge is that it works best when it feels natural, inevitable. That evening we had dinner at Joe's Stone Crab, a Miami institution that I knew Clayton had always wanted to try. What now? Alexander asked. Now we enjoy our evening, I said, finishing my champagne. We have dinner at the main restaurant, make sure they see us, and then we go dancing. We act like a couple who's rediscovering each other. Alicia. What? This is working better than I expected. The look on Glenda's face. I've never seen her look so unsettled. I smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile I had managed in days. Alexander, we haven't even gotten started yet. The main dining room of the Celestial Dream was a masterpiece of maritime elegance, crystal chandeliers, pristine white linens, servers in crisp uniforms gliding between tables with practiced grace. Alexander and I were seated at a table for two near the center of the room, perfectly positioned to be seen by anyone entering or leaving. Clayton and Glenda arrived 20 minutes after us, clearly having delayed their entrance to avoid us. They were seated across the room, but I could feel Clayton's eyes on me throughout the meal. Every time I laughed at something Alexander said, every time I reached across the table to touch his hand, I could practically see my husband's blood pressure rising. You're enjoying this, Alexander observed quietly as I cut into my lobster thermidor. I am, I admitted. Is that terrible? Given what they've put us through? No, I don't think it's terrible at all. Alexander had surprised me during our time together. Beneath his reserved, professional demeanor was a man with surprising depth and a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable. He was nothing like Clayton. Where my husband was flashy and gregarious, Alexander was thoughtful and measured. Where Clayton demanded attention, Alexander commanded respect. Tell me about your children, I said, partly because I was genuinely curious and partly because I wanted Clayton to see me being intimate and personal with another man. Alexander's face softened. Rebecca is 16, all ambition and sharp edges, like her mother. She wants to be a lawyer, which terrifies me because she'll probably be brilliant at it. Michael is 12, quieter, more like me. He's interested in science, wants to understand how everything works. They don't know about any of this? No. And I hope they never have to. That's part of why I'm here with you instead of filing for divorce immediately. I need to understand what Glenda was thinking, what she was planning. Whether this was just physical or if she was ready to leave our family entirely. I glanced across the room where Glenda was pushing food around her plate, clearly too nervous to eat. What will you do if it's the latter? I honestly don't know. Alexander followed my gaze. What about you? Will you leave Clayton? The question hung in the air between us. I realized I hadn't actually thought beyond this cruise, beyond the immediate satisfaction of disrupting their perfect romantic getaway. I don't know either, I said finally. The Alicia who existed a week ago would have tried to work things out, would have gone to marriage counseling, would have blamed herself for not being enough. But that Alicia was living a lie. And this Alicia? This Alicia is still figuring out who she is. After dinner, we went to the ship's main lounge where a live band was playing jazz standards. The room was dimly lit, filled with couples swaying to the music, and I knew this would be the perfect setting for the next phase of our performance. Dance with me, I said to Alexander, extending my hand. He hesitated. Alicia, I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer. You don't need to be good, I said. You just need to hold me like you mean it. Alexander proved to be better than he claimed. He led me onto the dance floor with quiet confidence, one hand on my waist, the other holding mine. We moved together naturally, and I found myself relaxing into his embrace in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. They're watching, he murmured in my ear as we swayed to The Way You Look Tonight. I glanced over his shoulder and saw Clayton and Glenda standing at the entrance to the lounge. Clayton looked like he was about to be sick, while Glenda appeared to be arguing with him about something. Good, I whispered back. Let them see what it looks like when two people actually want to be together. The words surprised me as I said them because I realized they were true. Despite the artificial circumstances that had brought us together, despite the performance aspect of our relationship, there was something genuine happening between Alexander and me. Some spark of connection that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with two people recognizing something valuable in each other. Alexander must have felt it too because his arms tightened around me, pulling me closer as we moved to the music. For a moment I forgot about Clayton entirely, lost in the simple pleasure of being held by a man who treated me with respect and kindness. Alicia, Alexander said softly. I need you to know that this, whatever this is between us, it's not just about getting back at them. I looked up at him, seeing my own confusion and unexpected feelings reflected in his eyes. I know. What are we doing here? I don't know, I admitted. But I don't want to stop. The song ended, but we didn't separate immediately. We stood there on the dance floor looking at each other while couples moved around us like water around stones. Finally, Alexander stepped back but kept hold of my hand. Should we go back to the room? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As we left the lounge, I caught one last glimpse of Clayton and Glenda. They were sitting at a small table now, heads bent together in urgent conversation. Clayton looked haggard, older than his 45 years. Glenda kept glancing toward the exit where we had just disappeared. Mission accomplished. But as Alexander and I walked back to our suite in charged silence, I realized that the mission had evolved into something much more complicated than simple revenge. I woke up the next morning alone in the king-sized bed, sunlight streaming through the balcony doors and the sound of waves creating a peaceful soundtrack. Alexander had insisted on taking the couch again despite my protests, and I could hear him moving around quietly in the sitting area. Good morning, I called out, pulling on a silk robe. Morning. I ordered room service, coffee, fruit, pastries. I hope that's all right. I found him standing on the balcony, already dressed in khakis and a polo shirt, looking out at the endless blue of the Caribbean. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. Second thoughts? I asked, joining him with a cup of coffee. Third and fourth thoughts, he admitted. Alicia, what we're doing, it's working. Maybe too well. What do you mean? He handed me his phone. On the screen was a text message from Glenda, sent at 3 a.m. Alex, I know you're angry, but we need to talk. I can explain everything. I love you. I love our family. Please call me. I stared at the message, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Triumph that our plan was having the desired effect, but also something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. She's scared, I said finally. Yes. And part of me wants to respond, wants to give her the chance to explain. But you haven't. No. Because I keep thinking about her laughing with your husband last night. About how happy she looked when she thought she was getting away with it. I set down my coffee and leaned against the railing. Alexander, if you want to talk to her, if you want to try to work things out. Do you want to work things out with Clayton? The question stopped me cold. I realized that I hadn't received any messages from my husband. No frantic texts, no missed calls, no attempts at explanation or reconciliation. He hasn't contacted me at all, I said, and heard the hurt in my own voice. I'm sorry. Don't be. It tells me everything I need to know about his priorities. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the ocean roll past. Today was a sea day, which meant all passengers would be on board with nowhere to hide. The perfect opportunity to escalate our psychological warfare. What's the plan for today? Alexander asked. The pool deck, I said. Couples activities. Public displays of affection. Really give them something to worry about. I had packed a stunning white bikini for this purpose. Not revealing, but elegant and flattering. The kind of swimwear that would make Clayton question when his wife had become so confident, so comfortable with her own sexuality. An hour later, we appeared at the main pool area like a couple who couldn't keep their hands off each other. I had chosen a spot with perfect visibility from all angles, and Alexander dutifully applied sunscreen to my shoulders and back with an intimacy that suggested long familiarity with my body. Clayton and Glenda appeared 15 minutes later, clearly having been watching for us. They took chairs on the opposite side of the pool, but I could feel their eyes on us constantly. Swim with me, I said to Alexander, loud enough to be heard by nearby passengers. The pool was crowded, but we found space to play like lovers. Laughing, splashing, Alexander lifting me in the water while I wrapped my arms around his neck. To any observer, we looked like a couple celebrating a renewed romance. But something strange was happening. The performance was becoming real. Alexander's hands on my waist felt natural, protective. His smile when he looked at me was genuine, not calculated. When he pulled me close to whisper something funny in my ear, I found myself responding to his nearness in ways that had nothing to do with our revenge plot. Alicia, he said quietly, his hands still on my waist as we treaded water together. I know, I whispered back. I feel it too. This is complicated. Everything worthwhile is complicated. We were interrupted by a splash nearby. A child had dropped a beach ball, and as Alexander swam over to retrieve it, I looked up to see Glenda standing at the edge of the pool, staring down at me with undisguised hostility. "Having fun?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I floated on my back, completely relaxed. "I'm having a wonderful time, thank you. The water's perfect." "I'm sure it is." Glenda's eyes narrowed. "You know, Alicia, I've heard so much about you from Clayton. He always said you were predictable. The barb was meant to hurt, and it did. But I had learned something about myself over the past few days. I was capable of much more than anyone, including myself, had imagined." "People change," I said, swimming closer to the pool's edge. "Sometimes they surprise you." "Is that what you're doing? Surprising people?" "I'm surprising myself," I replied honestly. Glenda's expression faltered slightly, as if she had expected anger or defensiveness and didn't know what to do with calm confidence. "Glenda." Alexander's voice cut through the tension as he swam back with the rescued ball. "I didn't see you there." The confrontation I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure was finally happening. Alexander handed the ball to its young owner and pulled himself out of the pool, water streaming from his athletic frame. "Hello, Alex." Glenda's voice was softer now, uncertain. "You look good." "Thank you." His tone was polite but distant, the way you might speak to a professional acquaintance. "Alex, we need to talk. Please." "I don't think we do." The pain in Glenda's eyes was real, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. "Almost." "The children miss you," she said desperately. "Rebecca keeps asking when you're coming home." "I'll be home Sunday," Alexander said. "We'll talk then. And until then you're just going to, what? Play house with her." The venom in her voice when she said, "her," was unmistakable. I pulled myself out of the pool and walked over to stand beside Alexander, water dripping from my white bikini. "We're not playing anything," I said quietly. "We're just two people who found each other at the right moment." "The right moment," Glenda repeated. "How convenient." "More convenient than secret hotel rooms and cruise ship trysts with other people's husbands." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Glenda's face went through several expressions before settling on cold fury. "You don't know anything about my marriage." "I know enough." Clayton appeared then, walking quickly across the pool deck toward us. He looked terrible, unshaven, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his clothes wrinkled as if he had slept in them. "Alicia," he said, slightly out of breath. "We need to talk. Now." I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and felt nothing but a distant sadness for the man I had once loved so completely. "No," I said simply. "We don't." "Alicia, please. This isn't what it looks like." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "It looks like you're on a romantic cruise with another man's wife. What exactly should it look like?" "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I reached for my towel, wrapping it around myself with deliberate calm. "I understand that you've been lying to me for months. I understand that you think I'm stupid enough to believe whatever explanation you're about to give me. And I understand that you're more upset about being caught than you are about hurting me." Clayton's face crumpled. For a moment he looked like the young man I had married 12 years ago, vulnerable and lost. "Alicia, I love you. I've always loved you." "No," I said, and the certainty in my own voice surprised me. "You love the idea of me. You love having a wife who asks no questions, makes no demands, causes no trouble. But you don't love me, Clayton. You don't even know me." "That's not true." "When's my birthday, Clayton?" The question came out of nowhere, but it felt important. Clayton opened his mouth, then closed it, confusion flickering across his features. "September. Something," he said finally. "October 15th, I said quietly. "It's been October 15th for 38 years. You forgot it last year too, but I pretended not to notice." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander moved closer to me, not touching but offering his presence as support. Glenda looked between us all with growing panic, clearly realizing that her affair was destroying much more than she had anticipated. "Alicia," Clayton tried again, but I held up my hand. "I'm going to get dressed," I said. "Alexander and I have shore excursion plans." "Shore excursion?" Glenda's voice cracked slightly. "Cozumel," Alexander said smoothly. "Alicia's always wanted to see the Mayan ruins at San Gervasio. I thought it would be educational, It was a lie, of course. We had no such plans. But the implication was clear. While Clayton and Glenda had been planning their romantic escape, Alexander and I were building something deeper, more meaningful. As we walked away, I heard Glenda hiss at Clayton. "Do something. They're making us look like fools." But Clayton didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me leave with another man, finally understanding that the woman who had waited for him every evening with dinner ready and a smile prepared was gone forever. The tender boat that carried us from the celestial dream to the port of Cozumel was crowded with excited tourists. But Alexander and I sat in companionable silence, watching the island grow larger as we approached. The morning's confrontation had drained us both, leaving behind a strange mix of satisfaction and emotional exhaustion. "Did we go too far?" Alexander asked as we disembarked onto the busy pier. "Which part? The public humiliation or the fact that we're starting to care about each other?" "Both." I considered the question as we made our way through the crowds of vendors and tour guides competing for tourist attention. "I don't think we went far enough." Alexander looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean they're still together. They're still on that ship, probably comforting each other, telling themselves that we're the villains in this story. They haven't faced any real consequences yet." "Alicia, I know what you're thinking, that this has gone beyond justice into something darker. But I can't stop now, Alexander. I won't let them walk away from this thinking they can just outlast our anger." We found ourselves at a small cafe overlooking the turquoise water, surrounded by the bustle of island life. Alexander ordered 2 margaritas, and we sat watching the cruise ships anchored in the harbor like floating cities. "Tell me what you're really thinking," I said. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, turning his glass in his hands. "I'm thinking that somewhere along the way this stopped being about Glenda and Clayton." "What's it about then?" "You and me." The honesty in his voice made my chest tight. He was right, of course. What had started as a calculated revenge plot had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. "Is that a problem?" I asked. "I don't know. 3 days ago, I was a happily married man with a successful practice and 2 children I adore. Now I'm sitting on a Caribbean island with another man's wife, plotting elaborate psychological warfare against my own spouse. And how does that feel?" "Terrifying," he admitted. "And more alive than I've felt in years." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "Alexander, whatever happens after this cruise, I want you to know that meeting you has been the best thing to come out of this nightmare. Even though I'm helping you destroy your marriage?" "My marriage was already destroyed. You're helping me find myself." We spent the afternoon exploring the island, visiting ancient Mayan ruins that predated our petty human dramas by centuries. There was something humbling about standing among stones that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations while we worried about infidelity and broken hearts. "The Mayans believed in cyclical time," Alexander said as we climbed the steps of a crumbling temple. "That everything that happens has happened before and will happen again. Do you believe that?" "Sometimes. Don't you think every generation thinks they're the first to experience love and betrayal and revenge?" "Maybe. But that doesn't make our pain less real." At the top of the temple we could see for miles in every direction, jungle stretching to the horizon, the Caribbean Sea spreading out like a blue jewel, and in the distance, the white shape of our cruise ship waiting to carry us back into the drama we had created. "What happens tonight?" Alexander asked. "Tonight is the captain's formal dinner. Black tie, assigned seating, no way to avoid each other. And..." I smiled and I could feel the edge in it. "Tonight we finish what we started." Preparing for the captain's formal dinner felt like armor plating for battle. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a midnight blue evening gown that hugged my curves and flowed like liquid silk, paired with the diamond necklace that had been my grandmother's. My hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, my makeup applied with the precision of a war paint ritual. Alexander stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his bow tie with the kind of masculine confidence that made formal wear look effortless. He had transformed from the rumpled, hurt husband I had met 4 days ago into someone who commanded attention and respect. "Ready?" he asked, offering me his arm. More than ready. The dining room had been transformed for the occasion. Crystal glasses caught the light from elaborate chandeliers, fresh flowers adorned every table, and guests moved through the space like elegant birds in their formal plumage. The captain himself, A distinguished man with a silver beard stood near the entrance greeting passengers. But I wasn't interested in the captain. My attention was focused entirely on table 12, where Clayton sat in his rented tuxedo next to Glenda, who was stunning in a red gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Alexander and I were seated at table 15, close enough to observe but far enough away to maintain our mystique. I had specifically requested this arrangement through a combination of charm and a generous tip to the maitre d'. "They look miserable," Alexander observed quietly as we took our seats. He was right. Despite their elegant attire, Clayton and Glenda both looked haggard. They weren't touching, weren't laughing, weren't even looking at each other. The romantic cruise they had planned was turning into a nightmare of suspicion and paranoia. "Good evening," said the woman to my left, a cheerful grandmother from Ohio. "I'm Martha, and this is my husband Harold. Are you two celebrating anything special?" "Our anniversary," I replied smoothly. 20 years. The lie came easily now. I was becoming someone who could create fictional realities as needed, and I found I liked this version of myself. "How wonderful. Harold and I are celebrating our 50th. Any advice for the young couple?" Alexander fielded this one with surprising grace. "Trust and communication," he said, his eyes meeting mine across the table. "Never take each other for granted." "Wise words," Martha agreed. "You two seem very much in love." "We are," I said, and realized it wasn't entirely a lie anymore. The dinner proceeded through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Alexander and I played our parts perfectly, the devoted couple reconnecting after some unspecified difficult period. We shared food from each other's plates, laughed at private jokes, touched each other frequently but not inappropriately. I could feel Clayton watching us throughout the meal, his attention like a weight across my shoulders. Every affectionate gesture between Alexander and me seemed to cause him physical pain. During the second course, Glenda excused herself to the restroom. I waited 5 minutes, then followed. The ladies' room was elegant, all marble and gold fixtures, with a sitting area where Glenda had collapsed into a chair, her head in her hands. "Rough evening?" I asked conversationally, touching up my lipstick in the mirror. Glenda looked up, her eyes red-rimmed despite her perfect makeup. "What do you want, Alicia?" "Nothing from you," I replied honestly. "I already have everything I need." "You think you're so clever, don't you? Showing up here with my husband making a fool of me." "I'm not making a fool of you, Glenda. You did that yourself when you decided to have an affair with my husband." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You thought you could have it all. The successful career, the perfect family, and the exciting affair on the side. You thought you were smarter than everyone else, more deserving of happiness." Glenda stood, her hands clenched into fists. "You know nothing about my marriage. I know your husband is a good man who deserves better than a wife who lies to him every day. And Clayton? What about what he deserves?" "Clayton deserves exactly what he's getting. The consequences of his choices. You're destroying 2 families." "No," I said, capping my lipstick and turning to face her directly. "You and Clayton destroyed 2 families. Alexander and I are just refusing to pretend otherwise." Glenda's composure finally cracked. "I love him," she said desperately. "I love Clayton and he loves me. What we have is real." "Then why are you here? Why are you so upset about what your husband and I are doing together? If what you have with Clayton is so real, so meaningful, why does it matter what Alexander and I feel for each other?" She couldn't answer that because we both knew the truth. Her affair with Clayton was built on fantasy, on the thrill of the forbidden, on the excitement of getting away with something. It couldn't survive in the real world under scrutiny when faced with actual consequences. "Stay away from my husband," she said finally. "Or what? Or I'll tell him what you're really doing. That this is all an act, a revenge plot." I smiled, and this time there was nothing cold or calculated about it. It was pure, genuine amusement. "Go ahead," I said. "Tell him. But you might want to ask yourself this first. What if it's not an act anymore? What if Alexander and I have found something real together? What if we've discovered that we're actually compatible, actually happy?" The color drained from Glenda's face as the implications hit her. "You see," I continued, "the beautiful thing about revenge is that sometimes it gives you exactly what you didn't know you were looking for." I left her there in the marble bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what she had lost. When I returned to the dining room, dessert was being served, an elaborate chocolate souffle that should have been the highlight of the evening. But I was focused on Clayton, who looked like he was about to explode from the tension. "Everything all right?" Alexander asked quietly as I took my seat. "Perfect," I replied, placing my hand over his on the table. The gesture was small, but I saw Clayton flinch as if I had struck him. For 12 years I had been his possession, his constant, his given. The idea that I might choose someone else, might be happier with someone else, was clearly unbearable to him. After dinner, the captain invited all guests to the ballroom for dancing. The room was dimly lit with a 12-piece orchestra playing classic standards. Couples moved across the polished floor like shadows, and the whole scene had a dreamlike quality that made anything seem possible. "Dance with me," Alexander said, extending his hand. This time there was no hesitation. I followed him onto the dance floor and melted into his arms as if we had been dancing together for decades. The music was unforgettable, and the irony wasn't lost on me. "Alicia," Alexander murmured as we swayed together, "there's something I need to tell you." "What?" "This morning while you were getting ready I called my lawyer." I pulled back slightly to look at his face. "About the divorce?" "About the divorce. I can't go back to pretending, Alicia. I can't look at Glenda every day knowing what she's capable of, what she's willing to sacrifice for her own pleasure. And the children? Will adjust. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, and they deserve parents who are honest with them." We continued dancing as I processed this information. Alexander was serious about ending his marriage. This wasn't just a dramatic gesture or a threat designed to bring Glenda to heel. He was actually prepared to blow up his entire life based on what had happened between us over the past few days. "Alexander, I know what you're thinking, that this is too fast, too dramatic. But Alicia, I've been married to Glenda for 18 years, and I've never felt about her the way I feel about you right now. How do you feel about me?" Like I'm seeing color for the first time after years of living in black and white. The music changed to something slower, more intimate, and Alexander pulled me closer. I was aware of other couples around us, but they seemed to fade into background noise. There was only the music, the movement, and the feeling of being exactly where I belonged. "Alicia, look at me." I lifted my eyes to his, and what I saw there made my breath catch. Not just desire, though that was present too, but something deeper. Understanding. Recognition. The look of someone who had found their missing piece. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "Alexander. I know the circumstances are complicated. I know this started as revenge. But what I feel for you now has nothing to do with Glenda or Clayton or getting back at anyone. It's just about you and me and the fact that when I'm with you I feel like myself for the first time in years." I wanted to respond, wanted to tell him that I felt the same way, but movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. Clayton was standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching us with undisguised anguish. "He's watching," I said softly. "I don't care. Look at him, Alexander. Really look at him." Alexander glanced over and I saw his expression change. "He looks broken. He looks broken." And he did. Clayton stood alone among the dancing couples, his face a mask of pain and regret and desperate longing. For the first time since this whole thing began, he looked like a man who was beginning to understand what he had lost. "Is it enough?" Alexander asked. "Is this what you wanted?" I studied my husband's face, this man I had loved and built a life with, and tried to feel satisfaction at his obvious misery. But instead of triumph I felt something unexpected. Pity. "I thought it would be," I admitted. "And now I think revenge is overrated." Alexander spun me gently, and when I came back into his arms I made a decision. "Alexander, when this cruise is over, when we get back to New York. Yes. I want to see where this goes. Not as revenge, not as retaliation, but as something real. Something that belongs to just us. Are you sure?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The song ended, but we didn't separate. We stood there on the dance floor looking at each other, while around us other couples continued their choreographed movements. "Alicia." Clayton's voice cut through the moment like a blade. I turned to see my husband standing just a few feet away, his face pale and strained. Could I speak with you? Please." I looked at Alexander, who nodded slightly. "I'll be at the bar," he said, squeezing my hand before walking away. Clayton and I moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the music and the dancing couples. Up close he looked even worse than I had thought, exhausted, defeated, older than his years. Alicia, I need you to know how sorry I am. For which part, Clayton? The affair or getting caught? For all of it. For lying to you, for betraying you, for taking you for granted. His voice broke slightly. For being such a fool that I nearly lost the best thing in my life. Nearly lost. Alicia, please. Come home with me. Leave this ship, leave him and come home. We can work this out. We can go to counseling, start over, rebuild what we had. What we had was built on a lie, Clayton. You were never fully committed to our marriage, never fully present with me. You were always looking for something else, something more exciting. That's not true. Isn't it? When did you fall out of love with me, Clayton? When did I become so insufferable that you needed to find comfort in another woman's arms? I never fell out of love with you. Then explain, Glenda. Clayton ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our early dating days when he was nervous or overwhelmed. I don't know how to explain it, he said finally. It happened. She was brilliant and challenging and she made me feel powerful, important. Like I was conquering something. And I didn't. You made me feel safe. Comfortable. But Alicia, sometimes a man wants to feel dangerous. The honesty of it was brutal and clarifying. Clayton hadn't cheated because I was inadequate. He had cheated because I was exactly what he needed but not what he wanted to want. Thank you, I said. For what? For being honest. For finally telling me the truth about what I meant to you. Alicia. You wanted to feel dangerous, Clayton. But you know what? I wanted to feel cherished. I wanted to feel like I was enough just as I was. I wanted to feel like the man I married thought I was worth protecting, worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for. That's what I'm doing right now. I looked across the ballroom to where Alexander stood at the bar, patiently waiting for me to finish this conversation. Even from a distance I could see the respect in his posture, the trust that I would make the right decision for myself. No, I said to Clayton. You're fighting to keep me because you don't want to lose your safety net. You're fighting because seeing me with another man makes you feel possessive, not because you've suddenly realized my value. That's not fair. Fair. I laughed and it was a sound without humor. Clayton, fair would have been you talking to me when you started feeling restless in our marriage. Fair would have been couples therapy before you decided to seek excitement elsewhere. Fair would have been honesty instead of lies. What do you want me to do? How do I fix this? You can't fix this. Some things once broken can't be repaired. I started to walk away but Clayton grabbed my arm. Alicia, please. I love you. I turned back to him and for a moment I saw the young man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The one who had promised to love and honor me, to forsake all others, to build a life of mutual respect and shared dreams. I know you do, I said gently. But Clayton, love isn't enough when it comes without respect, without fidelity, without the basic consideration that your partner deserves the truth. And him? Clayton nodded toward Alexander. You love him. I'm beginning to. After 4 days? Sometimes 4 days of honesty is worth more than 12 years of lies. I pulled my arm free from his grasp, not roughly but firmly. Goodbye, Clayton. Alicia, wait. What about our house? Our life? Everything we built together. We'll figure it out. Lawyers, mediators, whatever we need to do to divide things fairly. But this, it's over. I walked away from him then, back across the ballroom to where Alexander waited. Clayton didn't follow, didn't make a scene. He just stood there watching as I chose another man over him, finally understanding that actions have consequences and some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. The next morning brought rough seas and a storm warning that had the crew securing everything that wasn't nailed down. Alexander and I sat on our balcony despite the rolling waves, wrapped in blankets and drinking coffee while the ocean displayed its power around us. Any regrets? Alexander asked, watching the gray waves crash against the ship's hull. About last night? None. About any of this? I considered the question seriously. 4 days ago I had been a different person living a different life. That Alicia would have been horrified by everything that had happened since. The deception, the revenge plot, the affair of the heart if not yet the body. But this Alicia, the one who had emerged from the wreckage of her marriage, felt no shame about any of it. No regrets, I said finally. What about you? I feel guilty about the children. About disrupting their lives, changing everything they thought they knew about their family. They're going to find out about Glenda's affair eventually. Better they learn that their father has enough self-respect to leave than that he's willing to tolerate betrayal. Alexander nodded, but I could see the weight of his decision in his shoulders. Glenda's been texting me all morning. Apologizing, begging, promising to end things with Clayton. And I keep thinking about what you said yesterday. About how this isn't really about Clayton and Glenda anymore. It's not. Then what's it about? I set down my coffee and turned to face him fully. It's about two people who found each other at exactly the moment they needed to. It's about discovering that the life you thought you wanted isn't necessarily the life that will make you happy. Alicia. I know what you're going to say. That we're both vulnerable, that we're making decisions based on emotion rather than logic, that we should take time to think things through rationally. Actually, I was going to say that I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The admission hung between us like a challenge. We were sitting on a ship in the middle of a storm, having known each other for less than a week, making decisions that would reshape the rest of our lives. By any rational measure, we were acting like fools. Alexander, I said carefully, what happens when we get back to New York? When the dramatic setting disappears and we're just two people trying to figure out how to build something real from all this chaos? I don't know, he admitted. But I know I want to find out. A particularly large wave crashed over the ship's bow, sending spray across our balcony and forcing us to retreat inside. The storm was getting worse, and the captain had announced that all passengers should remain in their cabins until it passed. Perfect, I said, settling onto the couch beside Alexander. A captive audience for the final act. Is that what this is? A final act. For the revenge part, yes. Tonight's the last night of the cruise. Tomorrow we dock in Miami and go back to reality. And tonight we find out if Clayton and Glenda have learned anything from this experience. As if summoned by our conversation, there was a knock at our cabin door. Alexander and I looked at each other, both knowing who it would be. Clayton and Glenda stood in the hallway, looking like refugees from their own lives. Glenda's usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup streaked, her elegant cruisewear wrinkled. Clayton looked even worse, if possible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. We need to talk, Glenda said without preamble. All of us, Clayton added. This has gone far enough. Alexander stepped aside to let them enter, and suddenly our spacious suite felt cramped and charged with tension. The storm outside seemed to have moved indoors, bringing with it the promise of destruction. Well, I said, settling back onto the couch, this should be interesting. The four of us sat in our cabin like adversaries at a negotiation table, the storm outside providing a dramatic soundtrack to what felt like the final confrontation of a war none of us had planned to fight. Glenda spoke first, her lawyer's training evident in her carefully chosen words. Alexander, I know you're angry and you have every right to be. But we need to discuss this rationally as adults, thinking about our children and our families. Rationally? Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. Glenda, you've been having an affair for months. You've been lying to me, to our children, to everyone who trusted you. Where was your rationality then? People make mistakes. Mistakes. I interrupted. Glenda, a mistake is forgetting your anniversary or double booking a dinner reservation. An affair is a series of conscious choices made over time. Every text message, every lie, every time you looked your husband in the eye and deceived him, those were all choices. Clayton shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Alicia, you're not exactly innocent here either. You've been manipulating all of us, playing psychological games. I've been responding to your betrayal, I said calmly. There's a difference. By having an affair of your own. Have I? I looked at Alexander, then back at Clayton. Have Alexander and I done anything that you and Glenda haven't done? Have we lied to our spouses? Have we snuck around behind anyone's back? Have we made promises we had no intention of keeping? The silence that followed was telling. Clayton and Glenda had no answer because they knew that everything Alexander and I had done had been in full view, with complete honesty about our intentions. The difference, Alexander said quietly, is that Alicia and I found each other after discovering we had been betrayed. We didn't betray anyone to be together. You're destroying our families, Glenda said desperately. No, I replied. You destroyed our families. Alexander and I are just refusing to help you rebuild them on a foundation of lies. Glenda turned to her husband, tears streaming down her face. Alex, please. I love you. I love our life together. I made a terrible mistake, but it's over now. I'll do anything to fix this. Will you? Alexander asked. Will you quit your job so you don't have to work with Clayton anymore? Will you submit to a polygraph test? Will you give me access to all your devices, all your accounts, all your communications? Will you agree to individual and couples therapy for as long as it takes? Will you tell the children yourself what you did and why Daddy is leaving? With each question, Glenda's face grew paler. She clearly hadn't thought through the practical realities of rebuilding trust after such a massive betrayal. Yes, if that's what it takes. And Clayton, Alexander continued, turning to my husband, will you do the same? Will you quit your job, submit to monitoring, tell everyone we know about your affair, take full responsibility for destroying your marriage? Clayton opened his mouth, then closed it. Like Glenda, he was beginning to understand that consequences weren't just something that happened to other people. I thought so, Alexander said. You want forgiveness without accountability. You want your marriages back without having to do the work of rebuilding them. That's not fair, Clayton protested. Fair. I stood and walked to the window, watching the storm rage outside. Clayton, you want to know what's not fair? What's not fair is lying in bed beside your wife every night while she plans her romantic getaway with another man. What's not fair is 12 years of devotion being repaid with betrayal. I turned back to face the room. What's not fair is realizing that the man you built your life around never really saw you as anything more than a convenient accessory to his ambitions. Alicia, that's not true. Isn't it? When you were planning this cruise with Glenda, did you think about me at all? Did you consider how I would feel if I found out? Did you care about the promises you made to me, the vows you took? Clayton couldn't meet my eyes. Of course I thought about you. And you decided I was worth the risk of hurting me this badly? I thought you'd never find out. So you thought you could lie to me for the rest of our marriage? I thought it would run its course. That it was just a phase. A phase that required booking a romantic cruise together? Clayton had no answer for that because we both knew the truth. He hadn't been planning to end the affair. He had been planning to continue it indefinitely, keeping both his stable marriage and his exciting mistress. Glenda tried a different approach. Alicia, I know you're hurt and I'm sorry for my part in that. But what you're doing now, breaking up 2 families, hurting 4 children, is that really going to make you feel better? You know what, Glenda? It's not about feeling better. It's about refusing to pretend that your actions don't have consequences. I walked over to where Alexander sat, placing my hand on his shoulder. Alexander and I didn't set out to have an affair. We set out to show you what betrayal feels like. But in the process, we discovered something neither of us expected. What? Clayton asked, though he looked like he didn't really want to know. We discovered that we're compatible in ways you and I never were, Clayton. That we share values you and Glenda apparently don't share. That we can trust each other in ways that you two have proven yourselves incapable of. After 4 days? Glenda's voice was incredulous. After 4 days of complete honesty, Alexander corrected. 4 days of actually seeing each other, really listening, treating each other with respect and consideration. This is insane, Clayton said, standing abruptly. Alicia, you're throwing away 12 years of marriage for a man you barely know. I'm not throwing anything away, Clayton. You already destroyed our marriage. I'm just refusing to pretend it can be salvaged. And the house. Our life together. Everything we built. We'll divide it up like civilized adults. I'll take what's mine, you'll take what's yours, and we'll both move on. Just like that. Just like that. The storm outside was beginning to calm, but the one in our cabin was reaching its peak. Clayton looked at Glenda. Glenda looked at Alexander, and Alexander looked at me. So that's it? Glenda asked finally. You're both just going to walk away from your marriages, your families, your entire lives? No, I said quietly. We're going to walk toward something better. The last day of the cruise dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Alexander and I stood on our balcony watching the Florida coast grow larger as we approached Miami, both of us quiet with the weight of everything that had changed. Second thoughts? I asked, echoing his question from days earlier. No, he said, pulling me closer. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous about what comes next. What happens when we get back to New York? Well, first I have to tell Rebecca and Michael that their father is getting divorced. Then I have to find a new place to live, probably a hotel until I can find an apartment. Then I have to figure out how to rebuild my entire life. And somewhere in all that, I'd like to take you to dinner. A real dinner, not part of any plan or performance. Just the two of us, getting to know each other without the drama and the revenge plots. I'd like that. We packed in comfortable silence, both of us reluctant to leave the floating sanctuary where we had discovered each other. In a few hours we would be back in the real world, dealing with lawyers and logistics and the messy business of untangling lives that had been woven together for years. Alicia, Alexander said as he folded his last shirt, I want you to know that whatever happens, these 4 days have been the most significant of my life. Line 2. Even though they started with betrayal and revenge? Especially because they started with betrayal and revenge. If Clayton hadn't cheated, if I hadn't found out, if I hadn't decided to do something about it, we never would have met. So you're grateful to him? I considered that. I'm grateful that his betrayal led me to you. But I'm not grateful for the 12 years I wasted on a man who didn't deserve my devotion. There was a knock at the door. The crew collecting luggage for disembarkation. Our time in this alternate reality was coming to an end. As we made our way through the ship toward the gangway, we passed Clayton and Glenda in the corridor. They looked like different people than the confident couple who had boarded 5 days ago. Glenda's usually perfect composure was cracked, her designer outfit somehow looking shabby. Clayton appeared to have aged years and days, his face gray with exhaustion and defeat. Alicia, Clayton said as we approached. Clayton. I wanted to say that I hope you'll be happy. Whatever you decide to do. The words surprised me with their sincerity. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Clayton sounded like the man I had once loved, humble, genuine, without calculation or manipulation. Thank you, I said. I hope you figure out what you really want from life, Clayton. And I hope next time you'll be honest about it from the beginning. Glenda stepped forward, her eyes red but her voice steady. Alexander, the children, when will you tell them? Tomorrow, Alexander replied. Rebecca first, then Michael. I'll explain that sometimes adults make mistakes that can't be fixed, and that sometimes the kindest thing is to start over rather than pretend everything is fine. And us? Will we be able to co-parent civilly? That depends entirely on you, Glenda. On whether you can accept responsibility for your choices and focus on what's best for Rebecca and Michael rather than what's convenient for you. The conversation was awkward but necessary, like surgery to remove something that had gone toxic. As we spoke, other passengers flowed around us, families and couples ending their vacations, returning to their regular lives. But for the 4 of us, nothing would ever be regular again. Goodbye, Alicia, Glenda said finally. Goodbye, Glenda. We didn't shake hands, didn't hug, didn't pretend to any friendship or forgiveness that didn't exist. We simply acknowledged the end of one chapter and the beginning of whatever came next. Alexander and I walked down the gangway together, carrying our luggage and the weight of our decision. Behind us, the celestial dream prepared for its next voyage, its next group of passengers seeking escape, adventure, or perhaps just the chance to see themselves differently. So, Alexander said as we reached the terminal, dinner tomorrow night? Tomorrow night, I agreed. But not somewhere fancy. Somewhere we can just talk. I know just the place. The small Italian restaurant in the village was nothing like the elegant establishments Clayton had always preferred. It was cramped, noisy, filled with mismatched tables and the cheerful chaos of a family business. Alexander and I sat at a corner table sharing a bottle of Chianti and a plate of homemade pasta, laughing about something completely ordinary and wonderful. Rebecca asked about you again today, Alexander said, twirling linguine around his fork. She wants to know when she gets to meet the woman who stole Dad's heart. I didn't steal anything, I protested. Your heart was unguarded and I simply claimed it. Much more romantic when you put it that way. 6 months had passed since the cruise, 6 months of carefully rebuilding our lives from the ground up. Alexander's divorce from Glenda had been swift and decisive. She had tried to fight it initially, but her lawyer had advised her that adultery made her position untenable. My own divorce from Clayton had been more complicated, involving the division of assets accumulated over 12 years of marriage, but it was finally complete. Any word from Clayton? Alexander asked. He's engaged. Alexander nearly choked on his wine. Engaged? To Glenda. No, to someone new. A paralegal from his office. 26 years old, never married, apparently thinks he's mature and sophisticated. That was fast. Clayton doesn't like being alone. He needs someone to take care of him to make him feel important. I just feel sorry for the girl. She has no idea what she's getting into. And Glenda threw herself into her work after you left. Made partner 6 months early, moved to a penthouse apartment, hired a full-time nanny for the kids. She's probably telling herself she's better off without the burden of a marriage. Are the children okay? This was always Alexander's primary concern, the guilt he carried about disrupting Rebecca and Michael's lives. But from what I had observed during my few meetings with them, they were adjusting better than expected. Children, it turned out, were remarkably good at adapting to new realities when the adults in their lives were honest with them. They're resilient, I said. Rebecca asked me last week if I was planning to marry her father. What did you tell her? I told her that your father and I are very happy together, and that if he ever asks me, I'd probably say yes. Alexander set down his fork and looked at me seriously. Alicia. What? Is that a hint? Maybe. He laughed, reaching across the table to take my hand. You know, when I first met you in my office 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be sitting here planning a future with you, I'd have thought they were insane. And now I think insanity might be underrated. I looked around the little restaurant at the families sharing meals, the couples lost in conversation, the simple pleasure of good food and good company. This was what happiness looked like, I realized. Not the grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where you belonged with exactly the right person. Alexander, I said, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met under different circumstances? If there hadn't been any betrayal or revenge or dramatic cruise ship confrontations? Sometimes, he admitted. But then I remember that we might not have been ready for each other under different circumstances. Maybe we needed to go through everything we went through to become the people who could appreciate what we have now. You think Clayton and Glenda did us a favor? I think Clayton and Glenda showed us who we really are under pressure. And it turns out we're people who choose honesty over comfort, who value integrity over convenience, who are willing to take risks for something real rather than settle for something safe. I raised my wine glass. To Clayton and Glenda then. For being exactly who they were. To Clayton and Glenda, Alexander agreed, clinking his glass against mine. And to us for being better. We finished our dinner as the restaurant filled with the evening crowd, content in our little corner of the world. Tomorrow, Alexander would pick up his children for their weekend together, and I would join them for Sunday brunch. A tradition we had established as we slowly blended our separate lives into something new and shared. Tomorrow we would continue building the life we had chosen, messier than our previous lives perhaps, but infinitely more honest. A life built on the foundation of knowing exactly what betrayal cost and exactly what faithfulness was worth. Tonight, though, we would go back to the apartment we now shared and fall asleep in each other's arms, grateful for the storm that had brought us together and the calm that had allowed us to stay. Outside, New York City hummed with its eternal energy, full of people making mistakes and finding love and discovering that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best thing that ever happened to you. Inside our small corner of the world, two people who had been betrayed by those they trusted most had found something neither of them had been looking for. A love worth fighting for, a partnership built on truth, and the deep satisfaction that comes from choosing to be brave enough to start over when starting over is the only way to find happiness. And if that wasn't the perfect revenge against those who had tried to destroy us, I didn't know what was.